Well, we know that when someone gives us a gift at the very end of their life, it has a lot of meaning for us. Or if they leave it in their will to be given to us. You know, if our grandma gives us her pearl necklace, or the portrait of her wedding, or our grandfather gives us his shotgun or his medals from the military, you know, there are nicer necklaces or better shotguns, but these ones have a lot of meaning because of who gave them to us and when they gave them to us. It's like a reminder constantly of them in our minds. And so they are so precious to us. And we know that, I've mentioned this before, that on the last night of Jesus' life before his death, he gave to us the greatest of all gifts, which was the Holy Eucharist. And not only is the Eucharist his body and blood given for our nourishment, but also his presence among us. So he didn't just leave us some token of remembrance, he gave us his very self to be with us always, so that we might constantly have his presence. But it wasn't the last gift that he gave to us. For the last gift, we have to go to the foot of the cross, where Jesus was crucified there. And at the foot of the cross was Mary, his mother, St. John, the apostle, the Mary, and the other Mary. It was a very common name back then. And Jesus was on the cross thinking about all that he had given his disciples, thinking about his teaching that he had given to them, thinking about his example that he had given to them, thinking about the great gift of the Eucharist that he had given to them, thinking about how he would give them his very life soon. And so the last thing he decided to give us was his mother. He looked down at Mary and said to her, "Woman, behold your son." And then he looked at John, St. John, and said, "Son, behold your mother." And at that moment, Jesus gave all of us to Mary, you and I included, and he gave Mary to all of us. And so she truly is our spiritual mother. We heard about in the second reading today from St. Paul that we have been adopted into this new family through our baptism. God is our Father, Jesus Christ is our brother. We are all brothers and sisters, and Mary is our mother. And so we should treat her like we would treat our natural mother. We need to love her and honor her and defend her and spend time with her and speak with her, these things through prayer. And they're so important. You know, there are many people, of course, that don't honor, respect, or love Mary. Unbelievers, people that don't love Jesus, of course, they are not going to love his mother. But also, even many Christians don't seem to honor the mother of God, the mother of Jesus, which is really unfortunate, and it's not exactly in line with what we read in the Bible, because the Bible tells us that the angel Gabriel came from heaven and said to Mary, "Hail, full of grace," or highly favored one. And then we hear that Elizabeth says to Mary, "You are blessed among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." That's what we repeat in the Hail Mary. And then Mary herself says, "All generations shall call me blessed." And there are some people who take the Bible seriously, but don't take those passages seriously, which is unfortunate. Even the Muslims actually respect Mary. They have their holy book, which is called the Quran, and the only woman that is named in the entire Quran is Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I had this conversation with one of the doctors who's a Muslim over at the hospital, because that day that I went to see him, he was driving from Wichita to here, and he was listening to the Quran, and he was listening to that passage talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so we had this great conversation about this woman that we both admired. And so even the Muslims respect her. So it's important for us to give her all the more love and respect and honor, because we know that some of her children don't do that. That's what a good child would do, right? If some of his siblings don't take care of their mother, then he would do it all the more. And we can trust that when we honor and love Mary, it means that we are being led closer to her son and honoring him too, just as he honored her. And we can also have great recourse to her intercession, to her prayers that are so powerful. So I'd like to just conclude by sharing a story that I came across recently in something I read. It happened over 100 years ago, probably in a small town, kind of like ours. These priests came for a parish mission, and the mission was going very well. Many people were responding to it, but there was one guy who was in the community, rather scandalous life. He didn't just struggle with sin like all of us do. He was very proud about that. And he openly mocked the faith. And he also tried to lead other people into sin and to rob them of their innocence. So he wasn't a very good dude. And he had not been to confession for over 20 years. So on the last day of the mission, he shows up at the church. He goes into the confessional, and he starts to tell the priests about all the things he had done, all the crimes he had committed, all of the sins he had done, and he even said in detail the plans he had prepared so that he might lead other people into sin. And he was not trying to go to confession. He was trying to brag to the priests about all the things he had done. And so this went on for 45 minutes. And then he said to the priest, "Well, I suppose that's enough for now." You think? That sounds like plenty, 45 minutes worth of that. And so the priest is like, "What do I do? This guy clearly doesn't have any contrition for these things. So I either send him away without giving him the sacramental absolution, or if I give him the absolution, he's not going to be forgiven of his sins because he's not truly sorry for them. And then he'll have the additional sin of sacrilege. And the priest would have the sin of giving someone an improper absolution." So he starts to think, well, I'll try to convince this guy that all these things are wrong. So he starts to speak about the enormity of sin, about how at the end of this life, we're going to have to stand in judgment before Jesus. And he talked about the pains of hell. And this guy stops him and says, "Father, those tactics may work on old women, but they're not going to work on me." Talk about a hardened heart. And so the priest finally said, "Well, I've listened to you patiently for 45 minutes. Could you do me a favor?" And he said, "Sure." The priest said, "You told me that you tell people that Mary is no different than any ordinary woman. So I want you to leave here and go over to the altar of Mary, kind of like what we have over here." And he said, "And there in front of the image of Our Lady, I want you to say this 3 times. Mary, I believe that you have no more power than any ordinary woman, but if you do, show it to me." And so the guy said, "Okay." And the priest went back to hearing confessions, and an hour later, the guy showed back up, shaking and crying and sobbing. He said, "Father, is there any hope for me? I have been such a monster. I insulted you. I dishonored the sacrament of confession." And he said, "But now I am ready to confess my sins truly and to receive forgiveness." And the priest was like overjoyed. He said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "I went over, as you told me, to the altar of Our Lady." And he said, I repeated those words, "Mary, I believe." And he couldn't even finish the sentence. He says, "I can't repeat those wicked words." And he said, "Something very strange came over me. And all of a sudden, I saw all the sins of my life and the ingratitude that I had towards God. And my heart was wrung with grief. And I started to cry tears of repentance." And he says, "And now I want to be forgiven." And so he received absolution and forgiveness through the sacrament. And then the next day, he was, for the first time in over 20 years, he received the sacrament of Holy Communion. And shortly after the mission ended, he went up to the parish priest, and there was a lot of people standing around. He said, "I'm so sorry, Father, for my life and for my bad example." And he told everyone, "I promise to atone for all of my sins and my bad example." And then many years later, the priest wrote that he had changed from being a source of scandal to the community to a source of edification for everyone in the community. And this is a story that's about the intercession of Mary. And and the power of her prayers in a person's life. So we should never doubt that, and as her children, we should certainly love, honor, and defend her, and spend time with her and speak to her through prayer, and all the more so because other people don't. And it will certainly lead us closer to Jesus, her Son, and help us to live as Christians all the better. So one last thing that I want to say is that we are going to have a parish mission here in a few weeks on January 21st and 22nd. Father Bill Casey will be here for the weekend masses, and then he'll give, I think, 4 nights of talks. And so it's a great opportunity. A parish mission is a time of immense grace. So we should start praying for this and thinking about and making plans to go, and then asking ourselves, well, who should I bring with me? A spouse, a child, a grandchild, a neighbor, somebody that's interested in the Catholic faith, something. Anybody's welcome to come to this. And it's like a retreat for the whole parish. You know, sometimes people go to retreats, but this time, the parish mission, the retreat comes to us, which is really great. So hopefully we can all plan to be there, and that will be a time of grace for all of us. If you would please stand for the creed.